Hello and welcome to Distress Tolerance Session 5. So for this session, again we're working from Marsha Linehan's Handouts and Worksheets, and you will need Handout 13 to 14a and Worksheet 10. Sheila, I think you have completed about a third of that anyway, and Worksheet 11 to 11a. So make sure you also have a pad of paper and a pencil. So if you need to, just pause the video and get yourself set up. And then just check out, are you in the right position? Is your body alert enough? Are you upright and focused on what it is you want to learn? And if you are thinking that maybe there's something not quite right, what adjustments can you make to make sure that you get the most out of this video? So in this week's session, what we're going to be looking at is the acceptance skills of willingness and half smile willing hands. And these are two of my favourite skills. I think you're going to get lots out of this. And if we remember that when we're looking at anything to do with DBT skills, what we're trying to do is balance acceptance and change. We're looking to see what are the things that we can actually do something about. What are the things that are actually out of our power or our limitations at that moment in time? And how do we know what the difference is between those two? So willingness and half smiling and willing hands fall on the acceptance side. But as we will see, once you start to accept, then you're in a better position to look at what you can change. So the goal here is to reduce your suffering and increase your sense of freedom. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the acceptance skills, is the feeling of freedom. So what is willingness? Willingness is the readiness to enter and participate fully, all the way, in life and living. And sometimes it's a lot easier to understand willingness if we have a look at what the opposite is. So the opposite of willingness is willfulness. And I don't know about you, but willfulness can be really useful. It can be very, very handy indeed. When you're willful, you're usually quite a passionate person. And passionate people have the capacity for great stubbornness, which can help them achieve amazing things for themselves and for other people. It helps them campaign for injustices. They can set up charities, raise funds that help fund gaps in healthcare and social care. And they usually keep going against the odds. Mavericks are people with great stubbornness. They can find loopholes that others won't look for and will take on cases that others won't. So there's a great deal to be said about being passionate and stubborn. And there are times when it really does not work well for us at all, and it becomes very, very ineffective. And it's at those times we need to recognise what's happening, use our wise mind and turn our minds around to willingness. So let's have a bit of a greater look at willfulness. So willfulness is a willful determination not to accept the reality of a situation. We attach to our expectations of how something should be. When you think back to your mindfulness exercises and you're becoming more aware of things that we get attached to, don't want to let go of, and how our expectations of things and our assumptions about things can sometimes get in the way. So when we're being willful, we're attaching to our expectations of how something should be really tightly. We become immersed in emotion mind and we will not let go. So do you remember the previous session where we talked about the monkey and the monkey's hand in the coconut? All he had to do was just relax his fist to bring that back out again. But most monkeys don't let go. Clues to when we're being willful is when we start using shoulds, oughts and musts. When there's an absolute, when there's no dialectic at all. And I think a really good example of this is a very old sitcom show called Frasier, which some of you may recognise and some of you may not. So in this sitcom, the two main characters, Frasier and Niall, are two American psychiatrists who are brothers. And Frasier has his own radio show. So this particular episode, Frasier and Niall drive into a car park for a shopping centre. And then just as they're driving in, they realise that actually the clock is wrong on the car and that Frasier only has 15 minutes to get to his radio show. So they drive straight round to the exit. And as they get there, the parking attendant tells Frasier that he'll have to pay $2 to exit the car park because it's $2 for every 20 minutes. Frasier protests. He's not parked for any length of time at all. But the attendant insists that he has to pay the $2 because those are the rules. Frasier retaliates by beginning a protest, sitting in his car at the exit gate for 20 minutes. He dismisses Niall's attempts to pay the $2. So when we're being willful, we just don't listen to people, do we? We're just like... Now you can imagine, can't you, if you're in a car park and you're trying to get out, there's usually a really long queue of cars behind you. And so after 20 minutes, you get quite a backlog. Now the other drivers, understandably, behind Frasier, are starting to get a bit irate. But Frasier does not listen, unrepentant, cannot believe that they can't see he's on their side. So it's that thing about getting caught up with justice. I'm doing this for you, isn't it? He even explains at length why he's doing this, because it is the principle of the matter. That's another one to be aware of when you go, it's the principle of the matter. Niles urges Frasier to just pay the money and go. Tells him he doesn't have to follow the pattern of his personality in proving that he's right, and he can be flexible. Finally, Niles manages to convince him, and Frasier proceeds to give a long speech to the car parking attendant, saying that he will pay, even though it is unreasonable to expect him to hand over this $2. This speech takes him over into another 20-minute slot, meaning that he now has to pay $4. He therefore crashes through the barrier, resulting in a really large bill. So I think it's a brilliant example of how sometimes when we dig our heels in and we become locked into what we expect should happen, then what we do is we make things a lot worse for ourselves. And we don't recognise sometimes when we're in situations that actually we have no power over. Frasier's in a system. There are rules in that system. Those rules are not going to change for him. He digs his heels in anyway and ends up with a massive bill. Okay, so let's have a look at willfulness in a bit more detail. So get your pad of paper and your pen, and just jot down some things that you notice as we're going through this slide. So, what are the areas where we can be willful? We can be willful when we refuse to tolerate the moment, when we are so fixed with what we should not be feeling and how it's not right that we should be feeling this way, that we actually refuse to tolerate those emotions, and so we often make things worse for ourselves. It's the epitome of cutting off your nose to spite your face. So just jot down, are there times when you've refused to tolerate the moment? Willfulness is also refusing to make the changes that are needed. So with both of these areas, sometimes we have to go through pain in order to be able to tolerate pain in the longer term and to be able to process things that are getting in the way of living our lives with meaning and effectively. So are there times when you've just dug your heels in and refused to make the changes that you know really that you need to? This is an interesting one as well. Willfulness is giving up or being deliberately passive. So what's really interesting about this one is it can look like you're sort of not doing anything, but actually there's so much that's going on inside, isn't there? And it's also really interesting because when you're giving up, you're being deliberately passive, you're also refusing to make the changes that are needed and refusing to tolerate the moment. So are there times when you know you've been sort of deliberately passive, or you've just sort of given up and refused to move? Willfulness is also the opposite of doing what works. So this is when we make life a lot harder for ourselves. So Fraser at the car park is a really good example of doing the opposite of what works. Sometimes you need to work within the system in order to make it work for you. Willfulness is also trying to fix every situation. So this is really apparent when we get hooked into that idea of fairness and of justice, where we're focusing on righting a wrong. And there's a really good saying by Mahatma Gandhi, which is an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. I'll repeat that again. An eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. I think it's something really important that I try to bear in mind when I'm getting caught up in all the things that I think should be fixed or should be right, or that they should be held accountable in some way. So are there situations that you keep trying to fix endlessly? What's the cost to you? Willfulness is also insisting on being in control all the time. So that's not only in control of the things that happen in our lives, but usually in control of other people, how we expect people to behave, how we think they should react to us, and when they don't react in the way we want, if they don't behave in the way we do, then we start going over and over and over and over again how we think that they should have managed that situation or how they should have spoken to us. We're often trying to insist on being in control rather than using our interpersonal skills. So willfulness is attached to me, and what I want right now. So it's that in the moment, in emotion mind, attached to this is what is important for me, what I want right now. So what that does is it stops us from seeing the whole picture. And there's an interesting legal term as well around willful ignorance or willful blindness, where people are under the impression that if they are not aware of something, then they can't be held accountable for it. So it's a willful ignorance. But actually in law you can be held accountable for it if that information is out there. So for instance, I'm very aware that exercise is really good for me. I'm not particularly keen on it, but it is good for me. Now, if I was to be very willful about this, and I certainly have been there, I could pretend that I don't know all that information that's out there about exercise. And so I could say, oh, well, you know, I didn't do this. because I didn't know about it. The information's out there, and it's our responsibilities to find the information out there. So willful ignorance or blindness can never be an excuse. It's also quite understandable. So, what does willfulness feel like? When you look at these little cartoon characters, can you recognise some of those body postures? Can you recognise how you hold your body? Just get in your mind right now, a time when you were a little bit willful. What do you notice in your body? Just jot some things down. Is there a tension there? Perhaps a churning inside? Maybe a tightness? What do you notice about how your head feels when you're being willful? Because quite often when we're being willful, we are so focused on what we have attached to. In some ways, it mirrors that idea of being under threat. So what thoughts do you notice when you're being willful? This shouldn't be happening. Shouldn't be this way. What else comes into your head right now? I shouldn't have to do this. They shouldn't behave that way. I'm not budging. I'll do it in my own time. You can't make me. There's loads of them, isn't there? So then think about when you have those thoughts in your head, how does that affect your body? How does that affect your posture? You notice a difference in your jaw, perhaps. Is there a tightness there? And what emotions do you notice? Often the first ones to come up are anger, resentment, bitterness. But if you look a bit deeper, quite often there's sadness. And sometimes it's sadness that we're trying to avoid when we're being really willful. And there are skills that we can use to manage sadness. So just allow yourself a few moments, maybe pause the video, to just jot down some examples of when you were willful. And what effect did that have? What were the consequences of that? So we're going to have a look at willingness step by step. But before we do, I'm just going to read you out something that Marsha Linehan wrote about life and acceptance. And she said that life is like hitting baseballs from a pitching machine. A person's job is to just do his or her best to hit each ball as it comes. Because that's what happens, isn't it? Life happens. It hits us whether we want it to or not. Refusing to accept that the ball is coming does not make it stop coming. Willpower, defiance, crying, whimpering does not make the machine stop pitching the balls. They just keep coming over and over again. So there's choices. A person can stand in the way of the ball and get hit, so we can make things a lot worse. We can stand there doing nothing and let the ball go by as a strike, and then we're at a disadvantage. We're not being very effective. Or we could take a swing at the ball. We could learn how to hit it. And life is like that. People can get as upset as they want about life, but actually life just keeps coming, one moment right after the next. Being able to accept the things that you can't change in that moment, and being able to skillfully use the acceptance skills like willingness means that you're better equipped to strike out at that ball. So let's have a look at what you need to do. So the first thing you need to do is observe the willingness. So in the last slide we looked at what does that feel like, to notice that experience. So you might say, I notice right at this moment that I feel my body feels like it's really tense and rigid. I notice that there's an urge to sort of block people off. Notice there's an urge to dig my feet in. I can notice my jaw being clenched. Feelings of anger coming up for me very strongly. Notice thoughts that go through my head. Say, I am just not doing that. They can't make me. Whatever it is you've written down, just notice and observe the willfulness. And then what you're going to do is you're going to radically accept that in this moment, at this time, this is how I'm feeling, and I might be acting willfully. So you can't fight willfulness with willfulness. You just get yourself into an endless fight where the person you're fighting against is yourself. So this is where we use the turn your mind skill. So this is where we're actively turning our mind to a different path. So saying, okay, I'm noticing what's happening for me. I think I might be acting willfully. I'm going to turn my mind towards acceptance and willingness. And I'm going to accept that this is the situation in this moment. And I'm going to look towards being willing. So I'm going to open myself up to that experience. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my body posture. I'm going to do opposite action. So if I'm really tense, I need to make myself relax. I need to change how my body is. One of the great skills is half smiling and willing posture, which is what we're going to come on to. When we're having a willing posture, that's opposite to the tension that we had before. So the first thing you can do is just move your shoulders down. Open your jaw a bit. Loosen something up. Turn your mind to accepting the moment as it is. Sometimes when we're feeling really willful, it's because our brains have got fixated on something that it thinks we're under threat from. And our brains can do that with so many things. So just asking yourself, what is the threat in this moment, is really useful. And it might sound like a daft question because you might think, well, surely my brain knows, but trust me, our brains don't know as much as we think. So ask yourself, in this moment, at this time, am I under threat? In this moment, at this time, is anybody attacking me? And by attacking me, I mean physically attacking me in this moment. What is the threat? Now sometimes if you allow yourself to access your wise mind might come up with some solutions or some ideas about what might be going on for you and what's making you feel so willful at that moment. Then you're in a much better position to look at how you can change things. So let's have a look at that half smile and willing hands. This has got to be one of my all-time favourites because I just think it's amazing. And it links in with the idea that we think that our brains are in charge, but actually a lot of the times we can influence our brains just by how we sit, how we stand, how we hold our bodies. And that sends messages to the brain to tell the brain everything's fine. Or it might send out messages to the brain to say, oh my goodness, you're under threat, do something right now. So we have a lot more control over this than we think we do. And half smile and willing hands is a really brilliant example of that. So, what do you do? So, let's have a look. Okay, so with half smile, the way I think is best to describe it, it's like an inside smile. It's like a smile you have to yourself. And I don't know any of you who've read the stories around Peter Pan, but when he tries to fly, it's about having an access to a happy place. Okay, well, you don't need a really happy place, but having something that sort of makes you smile that you can access is a really useful way of being able to activate that half smile. So first of all, think of something that makes you smile. Then what I want you to do is I want you to relax your face from the top right down to your chin, jaw. So sometimes it's really useful to scrunch your face up and then relax it. So a bit like when we're looking at progressive muscle relaxation. Okay, so I'm going to do this. You ready? Scrunch your face up really tight and then relax. Okay, what do you notice? Sometimes it's good to just sort of move your eyebrows down, go down, loosen your jaw, so your face is relaxed. Now obviously when you get more adept at doing this, you don't have to sit there in a very tense meeting massaging your face. So this is just a way of you getting connection with what this actually feels like. Okay, so then what you're going to do is you're just going to think of something that makes you smile and do an inside smile. So you might notice the corners of your lips going up slightly, but it's only likely that you're the one who's going to be feeling that. It's not, you don't need other people to see it. So half smile is slightly upturned lips on the inside with a relaxed face. What you're aiming for is a serene facial expression, and that connects with your brain to tell your brain that everything's okay. Now, don't go for pretend smile, because all that does is tell your brain that something's not right because you're hiding or trying to cover up your feelings. Okay, so does not work. Relaxed face, think of something that makes you smile, feel that inside smile. So now we're going to look at willing hands. So you can either stand or sit to do this. There's lots of different ways you can do it. Doesn't really matter. The first and most important thing is that you focus on just dropping your shoulders down so that your arms are relaxed. When you do that, you will notice that your hands should then become a lot more loose. So just check that they're not clenched like this. You want your hands open. Now, if your arms are by your side, then what you're going to do is I'm just going to lift them up. So you're going to move your hands out as if they're like this. So your thumbs are on the outside of the body. So you just hold them down like this. So when you do that, what do you notice? If you're sitting, so much easier, because you can rest your hands either on your lap or on the arms of the chair, and what you're aiming to do is just hold your hands out like this. Now what's great about this is if you're in a meeting or if you're somewhere out and about, coffee shop, whatever, you've got hands under a table, nobody will see what you can do. So if you're feeling a bit irritated, do willing hands, half smile. So As you're sitting here right now, drop those shoulders, willing hands, then add half smile. What are you noticing? When you sit like this with willing hands and half smile, does it make you more likely or less likely to feel the urge to be willful? And if you're sitting like this, does it make it easier or harder to access wise mind? Sometimes adopting this posture sends a message to our brain to say, hey, everything's okay. It calms our system down. It means that we are more able to access wise mind. We're more able to act effectively. And we can accept change and experience that sense of freedom in that moment. Okay, so we've come to the end of this video, and now it's practice, practice, practice. Have a look at those worksheets, read through the handouts, see how many times this week that you can do half smile and willing hands. Note how many times you moved into willfulness and how many times you caught yourself and turned your mind into willingness. What effect did it have? This is all about experimenting. What did you notice when you did that? Practice, 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 and you can do this.